Hello everyone. Moving right along, we're going to be covering the internal heart anatomy. Therefore, let's see what this is about. When we open the heart, as seen on these images, we will be able to notice the internal structures. Let's talk first about the valves, since we have already covered most of them earlier. There are 4 heart valves, and the main function of any valve is to prevent the backflow of blood from returning to its original compartment. And there are 2 that will be present between the atria and the ventricles of both sides. The one on the right side is between the right atrium and the right ventricle, and it is called the right atrioventricular valve. And the name says it all, right? A valve located in between the atrium and the ventricle on the right side. Same thing for the left atrioventricular valve, which is located on the left side. Both will prevent the blood from returning into the atria once they have moved into the ventricles. Now, the right atrioventricular valve can also be called the tricuspid, and the left atrioventricular valve can also be called the bicuspid valve. And this just means that the tricuspid has 3 cusps or flaps, as we can see from this image, and the bicuspid has 2 cusps. In addition, the bicuspid valve can also be called the mitral valve. Then we have what we call 2 semilunar valves, which is going to be located on the blood vessels where the blood is exiting the heart, which, as we know, will be the arteries, as blood leaves the heart through arteries, therefore the pulmonary trunk and the aorta. The valve in the pulmonary trunk is called the pulmonary valve or pulmonary semilunar valve, and the valve in the aorta is called the aortic valve or the aortic semilunar valve. And we can see a little bit of it here and on this image of the left side of the heart as well. The word pulmonary and aortic are easy, as they are coming from the blood vessels where they are located. And the word semilunar comes from the shape of their 3 cusps, which resembles half-moon shaped pockets, of which we can't really appreciate those shapes on this image over here, but on our body it does look like half a moon. Continuing with the valves, we have these structures that hold them in place, which are called the chordae tendineae on both sides. We can see them on these images as well. These structures, they will be anchored by muscle structures that stick out called the papillary muscles. And both these structures, they will prevent the backflow of blood, as they will hold the valves in place during the contraction. And this big structure on this image is also a papillary muscle, since it is holding the chordae tendineae in place. Always think about concepts instead of memorizing them. There is one more muscle named structure, which is the pectinate muscle. And this thin layer of muscle is only present in the atria. It is easier to visualize it on the right side, and this is why most of the models only show it on the right side, as we can see from both models, which is only showing the pectinate muscle on the right atrium. Now, this image here might be a little bit hard to visualize, and to explain a little bit better what this represents, it is showing the posterior side of the anterior wall of the right and left atria. It would be the part that is covering this model and closing the heart. And this muscle is going to be important to push the last little bit of blood into the ventricles. It is just like they say in the military, no one is left behind. In this case, no blood is left behind. Here on this image and also on this other image, we can see the interventricular septum. Like the name says, a separation between ventricles, interventricular, which will do just this. It will separate the 2 ventricles, and this prevents the blood from the right ventricle, which is rich in carbon dioxide, to mix with the blood in the left ventricle, which is rich in oxygen. Can you imagine if it didn't have the septum? It would be a disaster. In fact, this may happen. There is a disease that's called the ventricular septal defect that is pretty common actually, and it is a congenital disease, which means that babies are born with this disease in which there is going to be a hole in the wall of the interventricular septum, as we can see from this image. And how do you think this will be detected? Well, one thing that can happen is that there will be more blood in the right ventricle, as the blood from the left ventricle, which has more pressure, will invade the right side. And this will cause more blood going into the lungs, and this might cause an increase in the blood pressure. If this hole is small enough, it will actually close on its own. If it is too big, then the baby needs to undergo surgery, but it is a simple surgery. Also, it makes sense that if you have a septum separating the ventricles, you will have one separating the atria, which is called the interatrial septum, as we can see on both of these models. Right next to the interatrial septum, we find two more structures. These are the fossa ovalis and the opening of the coronary sinus. The fossa ovalis, like the name says, is going to be an oval depression. From the 5th week of embryonic development until birth, there is an oval opening, which is called the foramen ovale. Remember, foramen for opening or hole, and ovale is the shape, which is going to be located in this interatrial septum. The foramen ovale will permit the blood flow directly from the right atrium into the left atrium, while the lungs are still developing and are non-functional. And at birth, the lungs will begin functioning and the foramen ovale will close. It takes about 48 hours for the hole to fully close, and when it closes, it leaves a depression, which is what we call the fossa ovalis. Again, there is a possibility of this hole not closing. And if it remains open after 1 week, then surgery will definitely need to be done to be able to close this opening. What do you think would be a side effect of this hole remaining open? Well, what type of blood do you think is circulating in the right atrium? If you thought of carbon dioxide rich blood, you are correct. And what type of blood do you have in the left atrium? This would be the opposite, blood rich in oxygen. This means that through this hole, you would have carbon dioxide rich blood going into the left atrium. From there, it would migrate down to the left ventricle and then be expelled throughout the body, which is definitely what the cells in your body are not expecting. They need blood rich in oxygen to be able to function properly. And one way that you can see that the hole has not closed is because the baby will also look sort of bluish, since the blood that's circulating throughout the systemic circuit does have carbon dioxide. Then we have the other structure, which is the opening of the coronary sinus, and this is where the blood coming from the veins that remove the carbon dioxide and waste products from the actual heart will be draining into right there in the right atrium. And we will talk more about this opening on the next learning outcome. Lastly, we find the moderator band, which is only located in the right ventricle, and it will have an important role in the electrical conduction of the heart. And we will definitely talk more about this in the next module. We can only locate the moderator band on this model, as it is not represented on this smaller model. And on this image is for us to appreciate the connection between the papillary muscles and the chordae tendineae holding the valves in place. Here we have the right atrioventricular valve. We can see a little bit of the chordae tendineae. And then on the left side, we will have the atrioventricular valve with the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles holding it in place. Now the trabecular carneae are these elevations of the muscle wall inside the chambers of the heart. So these projections are called trabeculae carinae.